As I said, that wonderful four-letter word, love. And of course, I'm thinking about what the eldership had kind of been thinking as the overall theme, that the purpose is love. You say the purpose of what? Well, it's the purpose of the kingdom. It's the purpose of Christianity. It's the purposes of God. It's it's the purpose. But the purpose is love, and that is borne out when you look at how central the idea of love, the thought of love, how prominent it is throughout the scriptures of the New Testament. Indeed, even the Old Testament. I did, however, focus on the New Testament, and was looking, and um, there's so many things. It's the message we've heard from the beginning that we should love one another. First John 3. I'm just going to rattle off a bunch of them here. So just listen, just get the point. It's the test that determines whether we're God's children or the devil's children. First John 3, verse 10. Without love, you cannot know God. First John chapter 4, verse 20. Um, the unity for which Jesus prayed. How are we going to have unity if we don't love each other? In John 17, he's praying for that. Um, I go down here, and on my list, I have Jesus telling us, here's my new commandment for you. Here's in John 13:34. Here's my commandment for you. John 15 and verse 12. James calls it the royal law. James 2, verse 8. Uh, you can't say you're in the light if you're not loving your brother. First John chapter 2, verses 8 through 11. Just the whole thing about love just keeps coming up, coming up, coming up. God is love. We could say other things. God is light. God is truth. God is spirit. And you think about those statements and you realize that if God is light, then there's no darkness. There's no moment of darkness. There's no moment of anything bad and negative in God. God is spirit. There's no physical limitations on God because God is spirit. God is love. That means in his entirety, in his wholeness, in everything that he is represented to be to us, in every action that he takes, God is love. It just fills him and he fills it to give us that whole idea of love. So I'm thinking about how the New Testament comes and is developed and is so full of this idea and makes it so central and so important. I did have a question as to what world is this message coming into? And I thought about those people who were there, who were hearing this the first time. Even the Jews limited love to their covenant relationships. They did not think about love outside of that. But the Romans and the Greeks thought of love as something that was only a part of their family relationships. That's particularly Roman. When they thought love, when they taught love, it was really more loyalty. This is your family. This is who you're supposed to be loyal to. This is how you show your love, is by your loyalty. The Greeks had a similar idea to that, and they would uh, work on that community and how we need to build that. And stranger comes through, they only if they fit in the community. And you see how that limits love. When you limit it to those you are in covenant with, when you limit it to family, when you limit it to just those who are my close associates, And the Bible describes love as something that is unlimited because God is love. When you think about God and his great power, God and his wonderful working, and the essence of his work and all that he's striving to accomplish is found in that love. It just gives you a thought about how great, how wonderful, how amazing the idea of love is supposed to be in our minds, in our hearts, and in our lives. We need to see that. We need to recognize that. And as I was looking at these things and comparing the love of the first century and how this came in and what did it change? What did it make difference? And I was filling out my background thinking, and that's sort of what I've been giving you here, some overflow from what was my background thinking on what this lesson needed to be. Then I looked at our list for the summer. And our focus on 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 1 through 8, that's where our focus is for the summer. And as I'm looking at it, I realize there's a relationship to the preceding verses. There's a relationship to the entire book, the entire letter that Paul is writing here to the church in Corinth. And when we look back and we see, and I think we need to get a context, we need to establish where we are. So that when we begin reading 1 Corinthians 13, when we begin looking at that, we know where Paul is coming from as he writes that. As the Holy Spirit led him to pen this letter to the church and talk to them about the issues that they needed to hear discussed. Why did his mind turn to this wonderful ode to love, if you will? Why does that fit in here? How does that fit in? And I think it's important to look and see, it's important to realize that Paul is making a really wonderful point. And we need to get that point. It needs to be strong in our hearts. It needs to be felt in us if we're going to be the church that Paul knew the church in Corinth could be. He also knows the church in Antioch. Yeah, the Antioch he knew back then, but also the Antioch we know today. What the church in Antioch can and should be is bound up in understanding the point Paul is making. When he goes from talking about all the issues that he had to talk to the Corinthians about, and he makes this what a lot of people think is a little detour in the middle to talk about this wonderful concept of love. It's not really a detour. It's a stop along the way that Paul was trying to take the church in Corinth. It's a stop along the way of where he's trying to take the church of the 21st century too. It applies to us every bit as much as it applied to them. And I hope we can see it as we read what Paul is talking about. So we're going to start 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 20, 1 Corinthians chapter 12. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 27. If you're familiar with this chapter, you know that he's using the body of an individual, a human body, as a metaphor, as an object lesson to teach about the body of Christ. And so your human body, you don't want your entire human body to be a thumb. We talk about opposable thumbs and how important they are to make us different from the animals. And yeah, what if your entire body was an opposable thumb? Wouldn't do much good, would it? So if you don't have the fingers, the opposable thumb isn't really worthwhile. You don't have the legs to take you somewhere to use that, it's not really worthwhile. You don't have the eyes to see what you're picking up, it's not really worthwhile. What point am I making? There's different things being done by different parts of your body, and they are all important. Even the appendix. I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, it's important. I know God wouldn't have put it there if it wasn't. And we see that object lesson that Paul's making in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And we get down to verse 27. And Paul says, now you, church, you are the body of Christ, and individually members of it. And God has appointed in the church first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then miracles, then gifts of healing, helping, administrating, various kinds of tongues. Are all apostles? See, he's taking that question of what if the whole body was an ear? Wouldn't work, would it? And so he moves to the church. What if everybody was an apostle? No, it doesn't work that way. We're in verse 29. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Do all work miracles? Do all possess gifts of healing? Do all speak with tongues? Do all interpret? And so you look at what Paul's saying there and you realize that he's pointing out something. We can't look at the church and think that we all have to be one specific thing. The church needs all the different things in order to be the church. You can't have just one thing. The story is told of a congregation where it seemed like the song leaders were getting a lot of praise from the congregation. And so this gentleman who had a decent voice, he wanted to be a song leader. And so he told the deacons in charge of making up the list that he wanted to be on the song leader. So he was put on that rotation, and he was taken off of the rotation of being the person who would go around and check all the doors to make sure they were locked when everybody was leaving, everybody was gone. I bet you can see where this is going. So he was glorying in his new position, and his old position was not being done. And the building was broken into, things were stolen, things were broken. And he realized, I was good at that. And it needed to be done. And I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do that for the Lord, and I am going to fulfill my place. And it's sad that it took that for him to learn that lesson. But the reason it took that is, as a congregation, they did not recognize that we all have our place. We all have the things that we need to do. We all have our place. We all have our things we need to do. And we look at that and we realize that we are the body of Christ and individually members of that body. And just like this finger has an important duty, just like this big toe. Even though there's different duties, even though it's a very different place, position, even though it's a very different way of being treated, they're still both important. And we need to realize that in the church, that is true. That individually we're members of that church. Individually, we have those responsibilities, whatever they may be, that we are able to do. And then Paul says in the next verse, the last verse of chapter 12, but earnestly desire the higher gifts. Earnestly desire the higher gifts. And I look back at the previous verses and I went, okay, which is the higher gifts? Which one of these is better? Which one of these? Now, wait a minute. What's wrong with that picture? You know it. You know what's wrong with that picture. If I start thinking, okay, which one of these is the higher gifts that I'm going to strive for, I'm going to reach for? We just had a story that showed us the problem with that, didn't we? That's not what Paul is saying. Paul isn't saying you should look for the higher gifts, the ones that are flashier, the ones that are more out in the eye of the people, the ones that receive. No, that's not what he's saying. He's not saying that any one of the gifts is more important than the other. He's not saying that any one of the gifts is more spiritual than the other. Of all those gifts that he mentioned, and you could go back to Romans chapter 12 and look at a different list of gifts. You can look at the Christian grace, you can look at all sorts of places in the Bible and see different things that can be done. And people have the ability to do. And each one of them is equal in importance because it is equally doing the will of God. That's not what he meant when he said earnestly desire the higher gifts. It wasn't look for the spiritual gift from this list that is the best one and strive for that. No. Earnestly desire the higher gifts, and I will show you an even more excellent way. You folks there in the church in Corinth, you've been fussing among yourselves. Go back and look at the letter as a whole. And these people wanted to be right and prove that they were better than these people and that they were wrong. And of course, these people thought that they were right and this was better and this. And they were having such disputes and factions over who they were and who was more important and who was more right. Paul said, let me show you the right way. Desire the higher gifts. And I will show you the even more excellent way. And he begins to write, chapter 13. I will show you the more excellent way. And as you begin to read through, you run into the higher gifts. Patience in verse 4. Kindness in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4. Meekness, also in verse 4. Humility in verse 5. Contentment, also in verse 5. Righteousness in verse 6. Integrity in verse 6. Tolerance in verse 7. Trust in verse 7. Hope in verse 7. Perseverance in verse 7. And completeness in verse 8. These are the higher gifts. 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 through 8. These are the higher gifts. These are the things that we need in our life. And I don't care if you are the person who, the only thing you are able to do is flip the light switch off when you leave. But you do it. But then you look at this list and you can do everything on this list. As far as a ministry choice for it, whether it's giving, whether it's leadership, whether it's preaching, whether it's song leading, whether it's being out teaching the gospel, whether it's helping people financially, whether it's going out and cutting people's lawns. Some of you can do a lot of those things. Some of you are very limited in which of those things you would be able to do. And of course, we could go on and make the list quite long of things that we could do. Some of you might be able to do a lot of them, but some of you would be limited. And that's not a problem. Because in the higher gifts, you can do every one. You can be patient. You can rejoice in righteousness. You can trust your brothers and sisters to walk with you and study together. You can continue on and persevere and know that what you have is taking you all the way to the end. You know these things. You can live these things. You can be these things. These are the higher gifts. These are the higher gifts. You know what Paul says about every one of these things? Love is. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy or boast. That's where I got the idea of meekness. Love is not arrogant or rude, humble. Love does not insist on its own way, is content. Love is not irritable or resentful. In other words, turns toward righteousness. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing. Well, that's where the righteousness comes in. I guess when does not insist on its own way and is not irritable or resentful. All of that I clumped under contentment. Does not rejoice at wrongdoing. Righteousness. Love does not rejoice at wrongdoing. I just said that, didn't I? But rejoices with the truth. That's love. Love bears all things. Love believes all things. Love hopes all things. Love endures all things. Love never ends. Those are the higher gifts. The higher gifts. And you can do all of those. You can do all of those. All of those you have. All of those you can do. Now you'll notice something. I went from the end of chapter 12 and skipped over to verse 4 of chapter 13. I skipped 3 verses. 1 Corinthians 13, verses 1 through 3. Let's go back and look at this. 1 Corinthians 13, verses 1 through 3. Paul talks here in these verses about those other gifts that he had already listed, that he had talked to the people about, saying, there were various kinds of things like teachers and miracles and gifts of healing and helping and administration and various kinds of tongues that he mentioned back in chapter 12. Here he mentions them again, but he mentions them in a different line of thinking. He mentions tongues and how people would be doing them. He mentions prophecy here in these 3 verses. He mentions understanding miraculously, having that given to them. He mentions inspiration, having all knowledge. He mentions the mighty signs that were being done by various members of the church. He mentions the sacrifice that a lot of people made. And we think about the fact, and you think back, and you realize that all of these things can be very visible. All of these things are gifts given by God, and in His grace, He gives people the ability to do these things, the ability to speak in tongues, the ability to prophesy, the ability to understand the mysteries so that He can teach them to others, the ability to be inspired and teach with God's full knowledge, the ability to work mighty signs, the ability to make deep sacrifices. Um, and we think back to the times when, and a story that was told to me by, all of a sudden his name is gone, Ira North. There we go. A story that was told to me by by brother Ira North, who preached in Nashville for a long time, that a man came to him and was talking to him about how he wished he could get up in front of people and preach the way Brother North could. He just, but he tried to get up in front of people, and even though he had the lesson prepared, he understood everything. He couldn't seem to get it out. He would stammer so much, and it just at the same time, another person came up and told Brother North about this condition, this situation that was happening with one of the members of the congregation, and they had this financial need and how great it was. And this other man just happened to overhear it and just happened to pull out his wallet and say, "Well, here's $500. Will that help?" Brother North turned to him and said, "God gave me the ability to stand in front of people and speak. He gave you the ability to make that money so that you can help me. God gives you the grace to be able to do something. Okay, you need to figure out what it is. But my point here is all of these are great and wonderful ministries. Paul even says, I could become a martyr. The wording, of course, in 1 Corinthians 13 is, if I gave my body to be burned. All of these things could happen. But now that you're thinking about it that way, listen to the way Paul was thinking about it. If I speak in the tongues of men, or even angels, but have not love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, if I have all faith so as to move mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, I even deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I have gained nothing. Yes, these are wonderful things that God has given people the grace to be able to do. In that day, the miraculous things. Today, we don't see those miraculous things, but we still have the grace given to us to be able to work some things. But these are, I'll call them, the lower gifts. As flashy as they may be, as spectacular as they may appear, these are the lower gifts. We talked about the higher gifts. The things that tell us what love is. This is love. Love is doing these things. Love is being the things that we talked about in verses 4 through 8. These gifts, as wonderful as they can be in the situations where they might be used, are the lower gifts because if they do not have love, the tongues are just noise, the powers are of no value, the sacrifices gain me nothing. They're, they do what they do. They may alleviate someone's physical necessity. They may teach the gospel and bring people to Christ. They may do a lot of things, but if they're done without love, person doing them, look how Paul evaluates that person. It, it's just noise. It's just busy work. It's just meaningless. It's nothing without love. It's nothing without love. That's what we want to talk about this. What do I need in my life in order to have that love in my life? And you look at that list, read 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 8. Read that list and see. That's love. If you want to know how to love, there it is. There's the description. And we're going to talk about the different facets of that love as we go through the summer and the different things that appear there, the different things Paul tells us are part of that love. And I want you to think about it just the same way we think about the fruit of the Spirit. When we realize that when we talk about the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5, verses 22 and 23, we're talking about the Spirit in your life gives you all these characteristics. And so I don't want you to look at 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 through 8, and say, okay, I like this part of love. I'll focus on that. Love is the whole list. The whole list. Be tolerant. Persevere. Rejoice in truth. Turn far away from unrighteousness. Look at all of those things. Learn about all of those things as we go through this summer. That is love. And you can, if you're that kind of person, you can do what Jesus said. You can love your enemy. You can answer the question that was asked of Jesus, who is my neighbor that I should love? All you have to do is step outside, turn to the left or right, see a person, there it is. That's a person I can love. And you think of this list and you think, okay, how can I live this list toward that person, whoever it is, coworker, neighbor, somebody who thinks you're their enemy? I say it that way because you're not going to think they're your enemy, are you? I hope not. Love. It makes everything we do worth something. Paul says very clearly in those first three verses of 1 Corinthians 13, you don't have love. Whatever else you have does not profit you. And it's nice that people have help from you. It's nice that the gospel is taught because of you. Those are nice, but you are not profiting from it. It's not motivated by love. Look at that list. Be prepared for the lessons as we go through them. And if thinking about this makes you think that you want the prayers of your brothers and sisters to help you, whether it's dealing with trying to grasp this idea and live it, or whether it's something else that has come up in your life, if you need our prayers, please come and ask for them while we stand and invite you by singing the song.